Namaste, Dandavat Pranam. By the instruction and grace of our spiritual master, Om Vishnupad, Paramahamsa Sripad Bhakti Madhava Puri Maharaj, we are here reading Srimad Bhagavatam. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Canto 3, the Status Quo, Chapter 29, Text 32. Artagyat samshaya cheta tatashrayan svakarma krit mukta shangas tatobuyan adhogda dharmam atmana. Better than the Brahmana who knows the purpose of the Vedas is he who can dissipate all doubts, and better than him is one who strictly follows the Brahminical principles. Better than him is one who is liberated from all material contamination, and better than him is a pure devotee who executes devotional service without expectation of reward. Purport. Arthagya Brahmana refers to one who has made a thorough analytical study of the absolute truth and who knows that the absolute truth is realized in three different phases, namely Brahman, Paramatma, and Bhagavan. If someone not only has this knowledge, but is able to clear all doubts if questioned about the absolute truth, he is considered better. Further, there may be a learned Brahmana, Vaishnava, who can explain clearly and eradicate all doubts. But if he does not follow the Vaishnava principles, then he is not situated on a higher level. One must be able to clear all doubts and simultaneously be situated in the Brahminical characteristics. Such a person, who knows the purpose of the Vedic injunctions, who can employ the principles laid down in the Vedic literatures, and who teaches his disciples in that way, is called an acharya. The position of an acharya is that he executes devotional service with no desire for elevation to a higher position of life. The highest perfectional Brahmana is the Vaishnava. A Vaishnava who knows the science of the absolute truth, but is not able to preach such knowledge to others, is described as being in the lower stage. One who not only understands the principles of the science of God, but can also preach is in the second stage. And one who not only can preach, but who also sees everything in the absolute truth, and the absolute truth in everything, is in the highest class of Vaishnavas. It is mentioned here that a Vaishnava is already a Brahmana. In fact, the highest stage of Brahminical perfection is reached when one becomes a Vaishnava. Text 33. Tasmanmai arpita sesha krihartatma nirantara mayarpitatmana punsho mayi sanyasta karmana na pasyami parambhutam akartu samadarshanat. Therefore, I do not find a greater person than he who has no interest outside of mine, and who therefore engages and dedicates all his activities and all his life, everything, unto me without cessation. Purport. In this verse, the word samadarshanat means that he no longer has any separate interest. The devotee's interest and the Supreme Personality of Godhead's interest are one. For example, Lord Chaitanya, in the role of a devotee, also preached the same philosophy. He preached that Krishna is the worshipful Lord and the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and that the interest of his pure devotees is the same as his own. Sometimes Mayavadi philosophers, due to a poor fund of knowledge, define the word samadarshanat to mean that a devotee should see himself as one with the Supreme Personality of Godhead. This is foolishness. When one thinks himself one with the Supreme Personality of Godhead, there is no question of serving him. When there is service, there must be a master. Three things must be present for there to be service: the master, the servant, and the service. Here it is clearly stated that he who has dedicated his life, all his activities, his mind and his soul, everything, for the satisfaction of the Supreme Lord, is considered to be the greatest person. The word akartu means without any sense of proprietorship. Everyone wants to act as the proprietor of his actions so that he can enjoy the result. A devotee, however, has no such desire. He acts because the personality of Godhead wants him to act in a particular way. He has no personal motive. When Lord Chaitanya preached Krishna consciousness, it was not with the purpose that people would call him Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Rather, he preached that Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead and should be worshipped as such. A devotee who is a most confidential servant of the Lord never does anything for his personal account, but does everything for the satisfaction of the Supreme Lord. Therefore, it is clearly stated, Mayi Sanyasta Karmana. The devotee works, but he works for the Supreme. It is also stated, Mai Arpitatmana. He gives his mind unto me. Therefore, these are the qualifications of a devotee, who according to this verse is accepted as the highest of all human beings. Dandavat Pranam, Mama Devi.
Hare Krishna, Dandavat Pranam, Prabhuji.
Text 34. Manasaitani bhutani pranhamed bahumanayan Ishvaro jiva kalaya pravishto bhagavaniti. Such a perfect devotee offers respects to every living entity because he is under the firm conviction that the Supreme Personality of Godhead has entered the body of every living entity as the super soul or controller. Purport. A perfect devotee, as described above, does not make the mistake of thinking that because of the Supreme Personality of Godhead as Paramatma has entered the body of every living entity has become the Supreme Personality of God. This is foolishness. Suppose a person enters into a room. That does not mean that the room has become that person. Similarly, that the Supreme Lord has entered into each of the 8,400,000 particular types of material bodies does not mean that each of these bodies has become the Supreme Lord. Because the Supreme Lord is present, however, a pure devotee accepts each body as the temple of the Lord. And since the devotee offers respect to such temples in full knowledge, he gives respect to every living entity in relationship with the Lord. Mayavadi philosophers wrongly think that because the Supreme Person has entered the body of a poor man, the Supreme Lord has become Daridra Narayan, or poor Narayan. These are all blasphemous statements of atheists, non-devotees. 35. Bhakti yogascha maya manavyudhirta yayor ekataranaiva purusha purusham vrajet. My dear mother, O daughter of Manu, a devotee who applies the science of devotional service and mystic yoga in this way can achieve the abode of the Supreme Person simply by that devotional service. Purport. Herein, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Kapila Dev, perfectly explains that the mystic yoga system, consisting of 8 different kinds of yoga activities, has to be performed with the aim of coming to the perfectional stage of Bhakti Yoga. It is not acceptable for one to be satisfied simply by practicing the sitting postures and thinking himself complete. By meditation, one must attain the stage of devotional service. As previously described, the yogi is advised to meditate on the form of Lord Vishnu from point to point, from the ankles to the legs, to the knees, to the thighs, to the chest, and to the neck. And in this way, gradually up to the face and then to the ornaments. There is no question of impersonal meditation. When by meditation on the Supreme Personality of Godhead in all detail, one comes to the point of love of God. That is the point of Bhakti Yoga. And at that point, he must actually render service to the Lord out of transcendental love. Anyone who practices yoga and comes to the point of devotional service can attain the Supreme Personality of Godhead in his transcendental abode. Here it is clearly stated, Purusha Purusham Vrajet. The Purusha, the living entity, goes to the Supreme Person. The Supreme Personality of Godhead and the living entity are qualitatively one. Both are defined as Purusha. The quality of Purusha exists both in the Supreme Godhead and in the living entity. Purusha means enjoyer, and the spirit of enjoyment is present both in the living entity and in the Supreme Lord. The difference is that the quantity of enjoyment is not equal. The living entity cannot experience the same quantity of enjoyment as the Supreme Personality of Godhead. An analogy may be made with a rich man and a poor man. The propensity for enjoyment is present in both, but the poor man cannot enjoy in the same quantity as the rich man. When the poor man dovetails his desires with those of the rich man, however, and when there is cooperation between the poor man and the rich man, or between the big and the small man, then the enjoyment is shared equally. That is like Bhakti Yoga, Purusha Purusham Vraja. When the living entity enters into the kingdom of God and cooperates with the Supreme Lord by giving him enjoyment, he enjoys the same facility or the same amount of pleasure as the Supreme Personality of Godhead. On the other hand, when the living entity wants to enjoy by imitating the Supreme Personality of Godhead, his desire is called Maya, and it puts him in the material atmosphere. A living entity who wants to enjoy on his personal account and not cooperate with the Supreme Lord is engaged in materialistic life. As soon as he dovetails his enjoyment with the Supreme Personality of Godhead, he is engaged in spiritual life. An example may be cited here. The different limbs of the body cannot enjoy life independently. They must cooperate with the whole body and supply food to the stomach. In doing so, all the different parts of the body enjoy equally in cooperation with the whole body. That is the philosophy of Achintya Bhedabhed, simultaneously oneness and difference. The living entity cannot enjoy life in opposition to the Supreme Lord. He has to dovetail his activities with the Lord by practicing Bhakti Yoga. It is said herein that one can approach the Supreme Personality of Godhead either by the yoga process or the Bhakti Yoga process. This indicates that factually there is no difference between yoga and Bhakti Yoga because the target of both is Vishnu. In the modern age, however, a yoga process has been manufactured which aims at something void and impersonal. Actually, yoga means meditation on the form of Lord Vishnu. If the yoga practice is actually performed according to the standard direction, there is no difference between yoga and Bhakti Yoga. Text 36. Etad bhagavato rupam brahmana paramatmana param pradhanam purusham daivam karma vicheshitam. This Purusha whom the individual soul must approach is the eternal form of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who is known as Brahman and Paramatma. He is the transcendental chief personality and his activities are all spiritual. Purport. In order to distinguish the personality whom the individual soul must approach, it is described herein that this Purusha, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, is the chief amongst all living entities and is the ultimate form of the impersonal Brahman effulgence and Paramatma manifestation. Since he is the origin of the Brahman effulgence and Paramatma manifestation, he is described herewith as the chief personality. It is confirmed in the Katha Upanishad Nityo Nityanam and Nityo Nityanam. There are many eternal living entities, but he is the chief maintainer. This is confirmed in Bhagavad Gita also, where Lord Krishna says, Aham Sarvasya Prabhavo. I am the origin of everything, including Brahman effulgence and Paramatma manifestation. His activities are transcendental, as confirmed in Bhagavad Gita. Janma karma chame divyam. The activities and the appearance and disappearance, the activities, appearance, and disappearance of the Supreme Personality of Godhead are transcendental. They are not to be considered material. Anyone who knows this fact that the appearance, disappearance, and activities of the Lord are beyond material activities or material conception is liberated. Yo veti tatvata tyaktva deham punarjanma. Such a person, after quitting his body, does not come back to this material world, but goes to the Supreme Person. It is confirmed here, Purusha Purusham Vrajet, the living entity, goes to the Supreme Personality simply by understanding his transcendental nature and activities. And thus ends our reading for today. We'll continue from text 37 on Monday. Jai Vishnupad, Paramahamsa Sripad, Bhakti Madhava Puri Maharaj Ki Jai. Jai Srila Prabhupada, Srila Guru Maharaj, Srila Guru De, Srila Acharya De, Srila Shanta Maharaj Ki Jai. Jai Rupanuga Guru Varga Ki Jai. All glories to the assembled devotees, all glories to the worldwide devotees, Sama Bhaktivedanta Vrinda Ki Jai. Jai Navadvip Dham Ki Jai, Nrsimhapali Dham Ki Jai, Mayapur Dham Ki Jai, Jagannath Puri Dham Ki Jai, Baladev Subhadra Jagannath Dhru Ki Jai, Ganga Mai Yamuna Mai Ki Jai, Vrindavan Dham Ki Jai, Giri Govardhan Gupta Govardhan Dham Ki Jai, Sham Kund Radha Kund Ki Jai, Tulsi Devi, Bhakti Devi, Vrinda Devi Ki Jai, Jai Srimad Bhagavatam Ki Jai, Jai Harinam Sankirtan Yagya Ki Jai, Scientific Sankirtan Yagya Ki Jai, Princeton Bhaktivedanta Institute Ki Jai, Sri Chaitanya Saraswat Institute Ki Jai, Sri Chaitanya Saraswat Mat Ki Jai, Nitai Gaur Premanandi, Hari Hari Hari
Hari
Bol.
Bol.
Jai Shrimati Uma Devi Dasi Ki Jai.
Jai Gurudev. Sripad Krishna Keshav Prabhu Ji ki jai.
Dandava Pranam Stiri.
Dhanavad.